Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We've all heard about clinical trials, the medical testing process that has led to life-saving medicines and medicines that improve the quality of life. We also know that historically African Americans have been less likely to participate in clinical trials. Well, tonight we're talking about a new initiative launched by the National Institutes of Health, the goal to improve prevention, treatment, and care for everyone, and why African Americans need to seriously consider participation. It's called the All of Us Research Program. And my guests tonight are Dr. Kareem Watson, Chief Engagement Officer of the All of Us Research Program, and Dr. Fatima Jackson, Professor Emerita at Howard University and Director of Howard's Cobb Research Laboratory. Thank you both for joining this conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Here's a quick fact that despite being 14% of the U.S. population, African Americans constitute only about 5 to 7% of clinical trial participants. Let me first start with you, Dr. Watson, and talk to us about the All of Us Research Program. What is it? Why now?
Well, thank you so much for that question. When I think about the All of Us Research Program, what is it? The All of Us Research Program is a historic longitudinal effort that's launched. It's really the largest initiative out of the Precision Medicine Initiative, which we sometimes call PMI. And All of Us was launched because we wanted to move away from this concept of a one-size-fits-all approach. We all know that your DNA, your genetic makeup, even your ZNA, your zip code neighborhood associations, where you live, things that you're born with, environmental things that you're exposed to, all these things play a factor in how certain medications work and what disease we may be exposed to, and even how we stay healthy. However, when you think about traditional research that's been done, particularly research is looking at genetic research, that research has not always been inclusive of populations who carry some of the greatest burden of health disparities. You mentioned the statistic that despite the fact that African Americans make up over 13% of the population, we are often only about 5% in some clinical trials. Well, I'm proud to say that all of us, because of our intentional efforts to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, for example, we have over 16% of our participants who self-identify as being a member of a racial ethnic minoritized population that would identify as being Black or African American or of African descent. And the reason that we've been able to achieve these unprecedented numbers is because of intentionality, because of where our sites are, how you can access the program, where you can enroll. And the last thing I'll say about that is that there's I won't call it a myth, but it kind of is a myth, that African Americans and certain minoritized populations are less likely to participate in clinical trials because of medical mistrust and because of historical misgivings that have often happened to us. Those things are true. There have been some atrocities that have happened to certain minoritized populations. However, there's new research that is emerging that says that when offered clinical trials, when clinical trials are conducted in spaces and places where people who self-identify as African American or of African descent, they're actually just as likely, in some instances more likely, to participate in those research studies when they're offered in a way that's trustworthy and the way they can truly see the benefit of participating.
So, Dr. Jackson, you have been doing this work for a really, really long time.
Yes.
When specifically looking at African American participation, and Dr. Watson just said it's not really a myth, but drill down a little bit for me when you've had conversations with African Americans more broadly, or even specifically patients who just say, no, I'm not doing that.
Yes. Well, there's been a lot of misunderstanding in the past about genetics, even among geneticists. So our knowledge is growing, and one of the things that I'd like to point out is that this 21st century is really the century of the life sciences. And the advances are being led by geneticists with brand new technology that is radically transforming what we are truly able to do and how deeply we can go into the cell and understand single cell genomics. And of course, we're beginning to really examine the genetic variability among peoples of African descent. And that's been lacking in the past. And that has contributed, of course, to the stalled effort in precision medicine, because you have the foundation for precision medicine is ancestry. So if you don't understand a people's ancestry, you can't give them precision medicine because you have no context within which to evaluate their genetic variability. But those things are all improving. And we're seeing, oh gosh, I guess 8 to 10 brand new innovations in genetics that will really make it possible to have a better fleshed out perspective on African American genetic variability. And that will make clinical trials more meaningful and more feasible for peoples of African descent. I remember when back in 1975, when we were going around testing people for sickle cell, and many in the
Mhm.
community thought that that was the way we were going to give them sickle cell, by testing for them. And so, we have to do the education piece along with the promotion of clinical trials, so that the community understands what's available, what can be done, what's feasible. And remember that this is all on a historical legacy of the misuse of African descended peoples in clinical trials. For a long time, especially during the era of American slavery, we were the only ones being tested on.
Mhm.
And without permission. As soon as we bring in the ethical components to clinical trials, then we see a decline in African American engagement because we weren't being asked, and things weren't being explained to us. And the history the foundational history of clinical trials in this country and others was not good,
Right.
but hopefully, um, that hopefully this is changing. And I would salute all of us for intentionally bringing in peoples of African descent, because usually we are intentionally left out. But
Mhm.
where this was definitely and precipitously um, designed to bring us into the fold. And that's important in terms of civil rights, in terms of human rights. It's also important in terms of evolution, because humanity's origins are in Africa. So I've always maintained that if you don't know about the genetic variability in peoples of African descent on the continent and in the diaspora, you really don't know what you're talking about.
Let me, I really want to drill down a little bit more, because Dr. Watson seemed to be chomping at the bit, and I know he wanted to talk about that. But even before we go back to those many points that you just made, Dr. Jackson, as it relates to this particular program, Dr. Watson, you've got a couple of events coming up. And I really think, and I'll give you a couple of moments to discuss the where and the when of these particular events. Dr. Watson, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. Yes, we have some events coming up in collaboration with our partner, one of our national engagement partners, which is the Delta Research Education Foundation, which we call DREF. DREF is the not-for-profit research arm of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, the second oldest African American sorority in this country. And we all know,
And also arguably the best, but that's another show. But please go right ahead.
Don't get me in trouble. Don't get me in trouble. I'm the youngest of 9 children, and 2 of my sisters are a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, along with my aunt, but I have cousins, so don't get me in trouble. Let's stay on.
Look, I have nine deltas, both living and late and lamented. But we wear different colors, but we're all moving in the same direction. So
That's
anyway,
right.
that's my disclaimer. Go right ahead.
And the beautiful thing, we're making jest of it, and we're joking about this is a beautiful thing, though, because we know the historic importance of our Black Greek letter sororities and organizations and our community-based organizations as a whole. We still know that in the African-American community, the faith-based community, and I use the word faith-based intentionally because of the diaspora of our beliefs and the breadth and depth of our faith beliefs and traditions. Our faith-based communities, our community-based organizations are so important. With that said, we are going to be on September 11th and 12th, partnering with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation to host an event where you can come and learn more about the All of Us Research Program in person, where you can actually see what it's like to sign up and enroll and understand precision medicine. But we're going to kick this off on Monday, September 9th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the historic African American History Museum, where we're going to be talking about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion in clinical trials, and even talking about several of the things that Dr. Jackson spoke of earlier. And Dr. Jackson is actually is going to honor us and be a part of that presentation on September 9th.
Thank you so very, very much for that. And we're going to talk about those particular events a little bit later in the program as well. But pursuant to the point I was making earlier about some of the things that Dr. Jackson was saying, because she was talking about the historic context of this. And a lot of people talk about Tuskegee. We get that. But we don't have to go back necessarily that far where there are issues of consternation regarding this particular issue, Dr. Watson. I mean, we can look at what has been in the news most recently, the issue regarding Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cells, for example. Dr. Jackson was saying a lot of times Black people were not asked historically. That's the first thing. But even when we look at where things are right now, there is still the issue of whether or not the family of Henrietta Lacks would be paid by the pharmaceutical companies that are making these life-changing drugs, because NIH doesn't make drugs. They don't make the medicine, they do the research. And so a lot of Black people would probably be concerned about the long-term effects if the pharmaceutical companies, in this particular case, one, isn't doing right by Black people. Why should we be involved?
Yes, we saw that. We saw this with the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I want to highlight that when public-private partnerships, when scientists, I even want to take out the concept of public-private partnerships, but I want to really elevate science. When we let science do its job, we can truly see how science is able to advance things. I was motivated and encouraged by some people in some communities were concerned because of the speed and the time that we were able to do the research, develop that it seemed to do the research to get the COVID-19 vaccine and everything else. But one of the things that I used to say when I was at the University of Illinois at Chicago as a community engaged scientist, when I was out in the community educating about research, I said, research starts long before you see the outcomes of it. By the time you see a drug that's on the market, or by the time you see a device or a vaccine come to market, please believe that that vaccine or that drug or that device has gone through stages of clinical trials that are phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. On average, it usually takes about 17 to 21 years or so for the time that something is a research question to the time that that drug, device, or procedure is FDA approved. That's a long time. But sometimes we're able to make things happen when we all come together. And that's one of the things that we saw in the COVID-19 vaccine development. Hold your
point, Dr. Watson. I hate to interrupt you. Hold your point, but I've got to take a really, really quick break, and we'll talk about this on the other side. Don't forget, You can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about clinical trials and the new initiative to get more African Americans to participate. My guests are Dr. Kareem Watson, Chief Engagement Officer of the All of Us Research Program, and Dr. Fatima Jackson, Professor Emerita at Howard University and Director of Howard's Cobb Research Laboratory. Dr. Watson, before the break, you were talking about research projects and how quickly, or in some cases, how slowly they can become available. Please continue your point.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, what I was saying prior to the break was that, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us that when we work together, science can be responsive to the needs of the community. And it also showed us that when we engage the community in a shared decision-making way, when we're transparent, having honest conversations, and also when we deal with things like cultural congruency. What do I mean by that? We know that when you send scientists out into communities, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, that have the similar lived experiences of the people that they're talking to, you're more likely to have the trusted relationship built up. And we also know that when you referred earlier to the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the African American male that was conducted in Macon County. The reason why I say that long name is because when we call it the Tuskegee experiment, we put the onus on Tuskegee. And it's so important to call that study by its full name, because that calling it by its full name also deals with a lot of myths of the study. It was the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis. And at the time, it's called in the Negro male in Macon County in Tuskegee, Alabama. And as Dr. Jackson talked about before, that study was conducted almost over a 35-year period. During that time, we didn't have the institutional review boards that we have now. We didn't have the informed consent process. We didn't have HIPAA guidelines. We didn't have a lot of things that are in place now to ensure that research is ethical, legal, and has social responsibilities that we have now. Those things were not in place. They definitely were not in place during the lifetimes of Henrietta Lacks when she was enrolled in a clinical study without her knowledge.
Yeah. So one of the other things, Dr. Jackson, that I think is so interesting and it needs to be brought up, and both of you, of course, can discuss this, but when you're talking about the process of clinical trials, that we know that some people may get the test medicine, and you have to forgive my lack of medical terms because I got my medical degree from a Cracker Jack box. But some people get the test medicine and some people get a placebo. They don't get the real thing. So bear with me here. If there is a clinical trial, for example, for diabetes that could possibly lead to a cure, if I have diabetes and I'm willing to participate in this clinical trial, if I believe that this test medicine may cure me, and I don't get it, where does that put me, if you get my meaning, in my thought process?
Well, this isn't my area of expertise, but I will tell you, as a member of the African American community, that historically we have felt that we were more likely to be in the placebo group. We have felt we had felt a degree of systematic and institutional exclusion. And what, in contrast to that, what All of Us is doing is intentionally including African Americans. And there's a point I would like to make about African Americans, that although we are speaking English and so forth, and we have names like Jackson and Watson and so forth, but we are diverse. We are from and we are an amalgamation of African peoples from all over the continent of Africa, but primarily from Western and Central Africa. And we showed that great diversity, genetic diversity. So sampling a few brothers from south side of Chicago is not going to tell you all about African American people, legacy African American people. That is, those of us who've gone through the legacy of American slavery, Jim Crow racism, and so forth. So, because we know that those experiences have also shaped the patterns of gene expression through something called the epigenome. So the All of Us effort is really noteworthy. And I've been, begging for greater African American involvement since the early 90s. The specific involvement of African Americans and diverse African Americans can only benefit us because we're not all the same. We come from diverse roots. Some places in the United States had more Africans coming from certain regions of Africa than others. And I just completed a computational study that looked at what we call the millennia of enslavement. And we focus on the transatlantic slave trade. But really, slavery was going on for over 1,000 years in Africa. And Africans from the Indian Ocean trade, the Trans-Saharan trade, the Red Sea trade were also, some of them ended up in the Americas because of the European desire for labor, for free labor, to as they competed with each other, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and so forth, the French. So we have these diverse origins that are going to be reflected in our clinical response to the diseases that we manifest. And only by broad sampling can we capture that wealth of diversity. And that's what I see all of us trying to do. And it's very notable. And we also, as a people, have to realize that if we want the benefit of the outcome of clinical trials, we have to participate. There's no free lunch here. If you want the benefit of having your genomes represented in the pharmaceutical databases, so medicines are made specifically for your genotype, then you have to participate. That's the only way it's going to be done. And those 5 brothers from Chicago cannot substitute for you because they may have a slightly different genetic or cultural background that influences their response to a disease. So I see a maturation that has occurred in the African American community. And we finally have a government-sponsored project that is at the right time with the right focus. So now it behooves us to participate and get our taxpayer money working for us for once.
Let me drill down a little bit more with Dr. Watson about this particular project, the All of Us Research Program. Dr. Watson, this is not an invitation, and correct me if I'm wrong, not an invitation for a specific clinical trial. This is an invitation to let people know that these are the kinds of things that need to be done to bring African Americans into the fold, correct?
That is correct. Some studies that are done, All of Us is not a clinical trial where we're trying to see disease with drug A is better than drug B. You talked earlier about one of the studies that you described earlier was more of a randomized clinical trial where people are randomized to see if they get the placebo versus if they get the intervention or the research medication or intervention. And that's asking a specific research question. All of Us is a little different. We're setting out to collect a variety of data from 1 million or more people, and then to make that data readily available to research so that they can ask questions. For example, I'm a participant in the All of Us Research Program. And when I joined the program, one of the things that I volunteered to do was to provide my blood sample, and my blood allowed researchers to look at my DNA, my whole genome sequence, and to look at my genetic makeup, right? But then they also asked me, would I be willing to donate my electronic health records? Where I said, yes, I would, because it's important for researchers and scientists to be able to compare. Well, this is Kareem's, and again, in the study, when I signed up, you won't find me in our big database as Kareem Watson. You'll find me as participant X number, and all my identifiers will be removed. So no one will know that it's me, Kareem Watson, participating in that study. They'll just know that some demographics about me, right, that are what we call de-identified. And in addition to that biological sample that I provided through the blood or sputum sample that allows people, like geneticists like Dr. Jackson, to better understand genes that I may have or mutations that I may have that may put me at a higher risk or put me at risk factors for certain conditions, we also have my electronic health record where you can see over time, you know, what medications that someone may be on and how their renal labs may change over time. You know, because I'm in this, you have access to my electronic health record. Did I get the proper screening at the proper age for certain cancers and other things? And then we complete surveys, because we also understand that things like social determinants of health play a role in our health outcomes. Some researchers are not describing them as social determinants of health, they're calling them social drivers of health outcome. And so it's so important for us to have these surveys too. So imagine a place where a researcher can come and go and come and say, I have access to someone's whole genome sequence so I can understand their biology of what they look like from a genetic perspective. I have their electronic health record so I can understand the history of their health process and their health journey. And I also have some survey data for them so I can understand questions like, have you been discriminated against in the healthcare system? Do you feel that you have access to healthy food? Do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Do you feel that, you know, your spirituality matters in your health outcome? These are just a few of the questions that we're asking in our various surveys. So, and what all of us does is that we make that data readily available to research so that they can ask questions and better understand disease process, prevention, screening, and other things.
This is a question for both of you, and I'll let Dr. Jackson answer first. It is one thing for this to work in theory. Obviously, some people need to hear this, again, from people they trust. But can either of you, off the top of your head, name any kind of historical context in which a clinical trial the outcome was beneficial for Black people?
Oh, so many. My goodness, there are so many. But maybe this is a good time to bring up the APOL1 work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, because here we have a gene that apparently evolved to protect against trypanosomiasis. That's
Which is
African sleeping sickness. Okay. It's transmitted by the tsetse fly. The fly is very slow moving, but takes a chunk out of you, transmits this parasite to you, and you become very lethargic. It's so we think that some of the initial racist interpretations of African peoples were because European explorers were observing Africans who were suffering from trypanosomiasis. In any event, in Africa, there are two varieties of trypanosomiasis, and they produce two different, selected for two different versions, two different alleles, risk alleles of the APLO1 gene. And what we find in North America is that African Americans sometimes have both risk alleles. It's called the complex heterozygote. But what it means is that your chances of developing chronic kidney disease are really high, much higher than if you only had one version of the risk allele. And so we had found a family that had the complex heterozygote. Part of the family came from West and Central Africa ancestrally. The other part came from Eastern and Southern Africa ancestrally. Now they're here in America as legacy African Americans. And we've got a genetically predisposed family lineage for chronic kidney disease that helps explain why generation after generation after generation, they keep manifesting chronic kidney disease. And so clinical trials by themselves could not discern the differential genetic basis. You need to have the genetic underpinnings, which is what all of us is focused on, getting the genetic underpinnings, tying that to the clinical disease, tying that to other sociodemographic factors, cultural factors that might be influencing disease expression. So in this case, this disease doesn't just come on because you've got the genes. It also is triggered like a bullet in a gun by chronic hypertension or HIV, or diabetes. So understanding that helps us plan for interventions way before the disease manifests itself. And that's one of the biggest positive outcomes that we hope for by the creation of this database, is that it will give us a predictive power so we can actually save lives, not simply treat disease, but save lives before the diseases are even manifest. Children can be tested and then they can put on the appropriate dietary or exercise regimes or disease interventions so that they never develop chronic kidney disease. So that's just one example.
Dr. Watson, your thoughts?
That example hits home for me more than you know, Dr. Jackson. I lost my brother, my oldest brother, from complications of colorectal cancer and chronic kidney disease. And the reason I say complications of chronic kidney disease was because he was a 2-time kidney transplant recipient because he had, end-stage renal disease and had to get 2 kidney transplants. Medicine was not precise for him because there was not talk in ways that how can we both protect his kidneys that he has, at the same time give him the appropriate chemotherapies that he needed in order to battle the late stage colorectal cancer that he had. And so the family, as a scientist, I know firsthand that there are certain genes that put you at risk for both chronic kidney disease and colorectal cancer. So as a participant in the program, I was nervous. I will be honest, I was scared when I got my results back because I wanted to make sure that we didn't have a family history of certain things like Lynch syndrome, which are syndromes that you can find out that you have through certain genetic tests. Thank God I don't have that and we don't have that. And I also was nervous, Dr. Jackson, when I got my results back to see if I had any of those mutations on the APOL1, and I did not. This information is so, being armed with this information is so important because I imagine a future where my children and my children's children will be able to say, I want to get tested to see if I have this particular mutation. And as Dr. Jackson said, so I can know what I should be screened for. So I can know if I should be screened for a colorectal cancer at what age and when. Or I can know that I should do everything I can. My doctor and I have conversations. He said, Kareem, I need you to be as healthy as possible, keep your blood pressure under control, and try your best not to get diabetes because of your family history and risk factors. I know that because of research and because of science. So when you talk about, are there research studies that we know that have impacted African Americans? It's so many. And the example that Dr. Jackson just talked about with the APOL1 mutation and what we know about that is just one example of thousands that are out there.
One of the things in just listening to both of you, if you'll allow me to even break this down into its simplest form, if you have aspirin that works on one group of people, but you give it to everyone because you assume that this aspirin will knock out the headache of everyone, and you realize that this person is going to need Advil because Advil is only going to work on people of color, and aspirin may or may not work for everyone. But if you don't have the trials, if you don't have the testing, if you don't have the data to understand that aspirin versus Advil or Tylenol or Excedrin works differently on different kinds of people, then that could very well end up being problematic. Not only could it waste time and work, but it could also, if you don't have the information, you could also make people sick.
That example is so spot on. You have no idea how spot on it is, because in our program, All of Us research program, in addition to information about genetic ancestry that you get returned, we do a return of information called Medicine in Your DNA. Well, we know that there's certain medications that work differently in people based on ancestry and genetic makeup. One of those medications is actually a certain type of blood thinners. And we have seen the data that show that if there's someone who went to the cardiologist, a doctor that treats your heart, right? Because you had a blocked artery, they may have put you on that blood thinner, hoping, and then they did the surgery to have to try to open up that artery. Well, guess what? If you had a certain mutation to a certain medication, certain blood thinners may not work for you the same way they work for everyone else. So despite the fact that you had that surgery, you did everything you thought to do. You were compliant with your medication. You had the surgery, you went to your doctor, but because of something that you didn't know in your genetic makeup, that same blood thinner that may work for me may not work for you at the same dose. So that's a perfect example.
Yeah. I have a few minutes left, but I wanted to make sure, first of all, Dr. Watson, that we let people know how they can participate in this program. Where can they find information, and what can they expect once they sign up? Will they get a letter, a phone call? How does it work?
So first, I would tell anyone who's listening, want to know more about All of Us, to go to our website at joinallofus.org. That's JOINALL allofus.org. Joinallofus.org to learn how you may be able to find out about more about the program. And I'll also encourage people, if you're going to be in the DMV on September 11th through the 13th, to please stop by where we're going to be at the Washington Convention Center from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. If you are, and when you go to joinallofus.org, it'll also let you know that you can find a site that may be near you, the academic medical center where you may join, or you also may find out how you can join by signing up online. And what can you expect? You can expect a similar experience that I talked about. You can expect that you will go through the informed consent process. And I use that word very carefully. I say process and not form, because there's a whole process for informed consent to talk to you about what you can expect if you participate in the All of Us research program. And then based on where you enroll, you can expect to be given the opportunity to donate your biological sample, blood or saliva, to get better information about your genetic history. You will also be asked to donate your access to your electronic health record information and to complete a series of surveys. And then after you complete that process, you will receive information via email or text message, whichever way you say, more likely via email, about what you can expect from the rest of your journey in All of Us.
Mm-hmm. How long do you believe or think that anyone who participates in this program will be in contact or connected to it? I mean, is this something that you anticipate will be handled or something that will go on in perpetuity, or is this obviously?
I can tell you what my hopes are as a scientist. What my hopes are as a scientist and a son of someone who lost both their parents. I hope that there are researchers 10 years from now who will have access to my data. That will have access to my data and able to look at that data. That is the hope.
Okay. And I've got another few minutes. I wanted to just get some final thoughts about this from both of you. And I can start with you, Dr. Jackson, because of course this hits home for you with all of the work that you have done during your entire career that is still long from over.
I just retired, so that's
but you still have work to do.
Well, this is certainly a wonderful time if you're in the life sciences. If you're
Okay.
doing genetic work, this is a wonderful time because we finally have the tools to make sense of some of the complexity of our world. And we also, as African Americans, have the voice. And there's a quorum of us educated who can push for some of the changes that we need to see so that we benefit from this society that we have contributed so immensely to. So I think this is a very good opportunity. I'm hoping that African Americans will adopt all of us as a personal opportunity to understand who we are, where we came from, and what our liabilities are, what our strengths are. I believe that it's a very good idea to go through the faith communities because our resilience comes from our faith. You know, it comes from our African spirituality. And that's what we bring. And that's what we brought into Islam. That's what we brought into Christianity. And we are, if you really look at the practice of both Christianity and Islam in the United States, you see the African roots as it's practiced by our people. And so that's where our resiliency has come. And I have published with two colleagues on the epigenomic changes associated with the American environment. It has shaped us in unique ways. And I really appreciate that all of us is starting off with a evaluation of African American diversity.
Yeah.
And my hope is that it will expand to ultimately include the entire world. But let's start with home first.
I'll let you have the last 30 seconds, Dr. Watson, some final thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much. I can't agree more with Dr. Jackson. All of us is a historic effort. And when I think about the importance of diversity and participating in clinical trial, it's exactly what Dr. Jackson said. We are able to make some of the findings that we're able to make in all of us because of the size and diversity of our data set. And we know that the more we participate, the more we know. So I encourage people to go to joinallofus.org to truly find out more about our program.
Thank you so much. And of course, that link will be posted on our website along with this conversation tonight after 7 o'clock. Dr. Watson, Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for sharing some time with us, and good luck in the work that you both are doing.
Thank you.
That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, September 5th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.